When was the last time you thought about Nvidia's Kepler GPUs? Some of you are probably thinking, wait, which generation was Kepler again? Some of you are probably thinking, I actually have one of those in my system right now, if not your main system, maybe just sitting in a server somewhere. That is the generation that launched back in 2012. This is your 600 and 700 series. Not something most people are running today, but there are cards still out there in the wild. And as is often the case, especially for older Nvidia hardware, support is... let's just call it lacking. If you're on a distro like Arch Linux, there are still supported drivers in the AUR. The Nvidia 470 drivers are the latest ones that are going to work with that generation of GPUs. And over in Ubuntu land, it was actually quite a bit easier. These drivers were still being packaged in the main repos. I say were because, well, that's kind of the whole point of this video. Back in May of last year, this issue was opened over on Launchpad. Nvidia 470/470-server fails to build on kernel 6.17 HWE. This is Ubuntu's term for getting unintended hardware working on different kernel versions. Typically in the context of newer hardware, like let's say a new GPU comes out and you're running the 6.14 kernel. That is quite an old kernel at this point. That's probably not just going to work. So this is the idea of backporting changes to that version to get that working. However, it also includes getting older hardware working that usually probably wouldn't work with this newer version. And in this context, older hardware is exactly what we are talking about. Ubuntu does not plan to support the Nvidia 470.xx driver on HWE kernels like 6.14 from now on. Please use the 6.8 kernel series for the duration of Ubuntu 24.04 support. Whilst this isn't the latest version of the LTS, a lot of people using an LTS are using it for a reason and don't just migrate over to the newest version whenever the new version comes out. Daniel here says, it looks like the package will need a few patches to support the 6.14.x, looking at Debian Unstable for reference. While 6.14.x is not officially supported on Ubuntu 24.04 at the moment, it should be the next HWE kernel coming in August. This was posted in May, and then a few months later, is there an update here? What's going on? Not sure why Ubuntu allowed the update to kernel 6.14 to proceed for those of us with the Nvidia graphics driver 470 when this is a known problem with no patch available. I ended up going back to 20.04, hopefully they can figure it out and fix the Nvidia driver bug. I really like 24.04, but cannot keep having my server go down due to kernel upgrades. To be clear with this, I am using a dated graphics card, but it is far superior than the 1070 that I have. Quadro K6000 is a really nice card, but the kernel upgrades keep breaking the driver. I appreciate you looking into this, and for the comment as well. That was not a necessary change. All you had to do was go back into the 6.8 kernel, remove the HWE kernels and the meta package, and sudo apt remove --auto remove linux generic HWE 24.04, 6.11, 6.14. Now you should only receive updates for the 6.8 kernel. This is what people were doing at the time. This was about a year ago though. Then said a bit later in the thread, having 470 drivers left in the archives as installable is a bug. This will be fixed by adding transitional packages to 535, which is the current Nvidia's LTS branch and is still supported. Fixing 470's code to compile against new kernels is not feasible. Compilation may pass, but there is no way to proof test that what compiled is actually working. If Nvidia stops supporting the driver, we won't pick it up. They actually recommend using Novo for old cards that are not supported by any of the current drivers, 535, 570, and 575. All drivers are compiled against kernels that we support, so there should not be a situation that DKMS fails to build a driver. For 470 it happened because the driver did not have proper transitional packages that would move people off of it a year ago. The result should have been that no one would be running 470 at this point. That change has now taken place. This issue has been marked as fix released, and has resulted in me getting an email about this happening and this issue being created a couple of days ago. Latest update breaks systems using Nvidia 470. Okay, let me explain what has happened here. Basically, there are people on Ubuntu using the Nvidia 470 driver. This is an ancient driver version. Nvidia doesn't support it. Modern hardware doesn't work with it. Most people are not using that driver version. However, if you have a Kepler GPU or another GPU of a similar era, that is the latest driver version that supports your GPU. Basically, any person using 470 at this point is doing so intentionally because the hardware they have requires that driver. What Ubuntu decided to do is stop supporting it on newer kernel versions. That's totally fine, understandable. Instead of just leaving things as they were, effectively what they've done here is released a transitionary package that updates people's system from the 470 driver not to Novo, which is what Nvidia recommends for these older GPUs, but instead over to the 535 driver. The 535 driver does not work with their GPUs, so now they have a situation where they have GPU drivers installed that don't support the GPU, and the GPU is obviously not working correctly, and it's running in basically like its fallback 640 by 480 mode. This has left a couple of people a bit annoyed, irritated, irked, peeved, vexed. More synonyms for being annoyed. Basically, people are not happy about this who are on these older systems. This is causing real-world harm. I had to spend hours fixing a system that wouldn't reboot after an unwanted Nvidia 535 update, and I have multiple CUDA-enabled systems that require a 6.8 kernel and a 470 driver combo that I'd plan to keep using for the duration of the 24.04 LTS. Keep in mind, this didn't happen with a new LTS version. This happened during an LTS cycle. Things like this are specifically the reason why some people use an LTS. But this is a prime example why if you are not paying for the LTS, LTS distros do not exist. If you are not a giant corporation that has a lot of money to pay them to fix your problem might as well not be real. Then we got this. Hello, this driver does no longer ship updates from Nvidia. I recommend referring to the discourse post below. It describes your options. This has been marked as won't fix, which obviously has made a couple of people quite happy. Back to Daniel. I understand that 470 is no longer supported. If you wanted to remove it from the repos, that would have been fine. Users with working systems would have kept humming along. The problem is the package incorrectly transitioned to 535. That did not help Kepler GPU owners. That probably didn't help anyone. I'm guessing everyone running 470 at this point is a Kepler owner. You just transition users from a working system to a broken system for no good reason. That is the core issue here. All this update did was basically just brick people's systems for no reason. Back to the Ubuntu person, Daniel. Removing would break users too in the near future as soon as a kernel update is available. We build and sign these drivers against each single kernel that we put out there. We understand that this is not an ideal situation and retiring hardware is always difficult. I'll pass along your comments. No, the DKMS package allows users to self-sign with mock. The 470 signed kernel module packages that Ubuntu distributors stopped a long time ago, around 6.8.0-79 kernel, that is fine. I was not asking you to start shipping signed 470 modules again. I'm asking you to fix the transition error. So they weren't even signing it in the first place. This was just like an error that was just created out of thin air. This also ended up making its way over to Linux Mint as well. Caution, Nvidia driver 470 changes June 2026. If you currently have a working Nvidia 470 driver installed in Linux Mint 21 or 22 versions, do not update to the latest update coming through Update Manager. That update is a transitional package which transitions your installed driver from the 470 to the 535. Most people currently using 470 are doing so because that is the last driver with support for their GPU. You will get errors because your GPU cannot use the 535. Also, there are some people in Mint which have gone ahead and made a PPA to make it so you can continue using that older driver and not have your system be an expensive brick. I also want to highlight this sentiment. I understand the policy position that Nvidia 470 is no longer receiving upstream updates and that Ubuntu does not want to keep carrying an unsupported legacy driver indefinitely. However, I think Daniel's point is worth separating from the broader support policy question. The issue is not simply that 470 is old or unsupported. The practical regression is that the 470 package path transitions affected users toward 535, while 535 is not a functional replacement for the Kepler hardware. On my Jammy/Mint 21.3 Nvidia GTX 760 system, the Nvidia message is explicit that the 530 driver will ignore the GPU. So from the affected user's point of view, this does not behave like 470 has been retired. It behaves like the package name 470 now leads to a driver branch that cannot drive the installed card. I understand there is no hardware detection mechanism in apt, and I understand that removing or retiring packages has its own risks around future kernels, but I think the migration behavior still deserves clearer handling or documentation because 470 to 535 is not a working migration path for Kepler users. For affected users, the practical choices appear to be move to Novo, this is Nvidia's recommended path, use Nvidia's legacy.run installer with the documented kernel update risk, good luck with that one, hold or pin an existing working 470 package set at the user's own risk, or use a community repack at the user's own risk, this is the PPA. My request is not please support 470 forever. It is that the transition should not imply that 535 is a replacement for hardware it cannot support, and the supported/unsupported choices should be made very clear near the packet transition failure point, not only in the discourse announcement. This should have been a warning in apt. This is something they have the ability to do. If you're on 470 and you're installing a transitionary package, it should say, hey, if you're on a Kepler GPU, don't install this because this will break your system. They didn't do that. Basically, they just expected that you were going to read the announcement and then somewhere in that long page, which usually is fine, 99% of the time, there's a thing in there saying, well, it might break your system if you're on these old GPUs. Good luck with that one. I have taken your feedback internally. Thanks. That is all. Nothing about possibly going and changing anything, nothing about reverting the transition, nothing like that. Just, I've taken the feedback. Enjoy your day. Have fun. Fix it yourself. I genuinely don't understand the decision to intentionally break a working driver without any prior notice or communication to users. My GT710. There are people that actually bought this GPU. I am genuinely impressed. Is old hardware? Yes. But it was working. It serves its purpose, display output, nothing more. There was no expectation of new features, no demand for updates. It simply worked quietly as it had for years. What happened here is that a system that was functioning correctly was broken by a deliberate upstream decision, and I only discovered this after the fact when things had already stopped working. No warning, no migration path, no heads up of any kind, just a broken system and a trail of breadcrumbs to follow backward. Yes, Novo works. I know, but that's not the point. The official driver is simply gone, removed without ceremony, and users who depended on it were given no say and no notice. This would not happen on Windows. An old driver with no updates stays functional indefinitely. Not indefinitely, but for a long time. You don't pull the rug out from under users who are relying on that hardware by all accounts still does exactly what it's designed to do. The hardware isn't the problem, the communication or complete lack of it is. I think the main issue here is that it happened during an LTS cycle. The fact that it happened during an LTS cycle just doesn't make any sense to anyone who was using an LTS to specifically not have that problem happen. The thing is, though, this isn't the first time that something like this has happened in the past. Notably, this right here. If I had to guess, I'd say Ubuntu isn't going to fix this. That's based on how they suddenly dropped support for the 390.xx midway through 22.04 cycle, and that they suddenly dropped 470 support from Ubuntu 24.10. If 470 had required patching to work with 6.11 HWE kernel, they probably wouldn't have done that. So if you are using this older hardware, if you're on Ubuntu, go to the Mint thread. The Mint thread has what you need to do, and you'll be fine. Now, maybe you'll need to come up with a longer-term transition path. Maybe go try out Arch Linux, because we have a package here. I don't know what to do for you. If you can, possibly get even a slightly newer GPU, because this is going to be a problem for you again and again. So, let me know, what was your first GPU? And what GPU are you running now? Do you still have your first GPU around? And do you have a Kepler GPU, and were you affected by this problem? I would assume somebody watching this video was probably affected by it, unless you just like drama. But I don't know. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you liked the video, go like the video. Go subscribe as well. And if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, Scribes, Daily Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and GPUs are expensive.